Johnny, and Cindy, all of whom come from diverse faith backgrounds. Nadia Ahmad is a practicing Muslim born in Orlando to parents from India and Pakistan. Johnny Roebuck of Arkansas is a Protestant by faith and a member of the Presbyterian Christian denomination. And Councilmember Cindy Bass is an active Baptist and member of Enon Tabernacle Baptist Church in Philadelphia. Also my hometown, go Philly. I myself am culturally Jewish, an agnostic atheist, and humanist, and I'm the proud daughter of Jewish immigrants from the former Soviet Union. As Democrats, we know that diversity is our strength, and our party's tent is big enough for everyone, for people of all faiths and none. And what brings us together is our shared values. In fact, I hope you'll join us for our program on Thursday, same time, same room, where we'll have two political scientists, Isaac Wright and Dr. Yuham Navarro-Rivera, break down the data about key faith and secular demographics and how you can use values-based messaging that appeals to both. Don't let anyone tell you that you have to choose between appealing to faith and secular voters. Our shared values far outweigh our differences. Before I turn it over to our moderator, Catherine Stewart, I want to acknowledge our two co-sponsors for today's event, Secular Democrats of America and Vote Common Good. Secular Democrats of America is a network of Democrats advocating for inclusion of non-religious Americans and mobilizing to protect our secular democracy. They advocate for secular governance, promote respect and inclusion of non-religious Americans, and mobilize non-religious voters. Please join them this Thursday at 10 a.m. at the Marriott Marquis, Grand Lakes Ballroom G, for a screening of the film documentary Bad Faith, Christian Nationalism's Unholy War on Democracy, which will be followed by a Q&A with the director and film participants, as well as a reception. Vote Common Good is moving gettable evangelical and Catholic faith voters to vote for Democratic candidates with a focus on the key electoral college states. They train candidates to connect with faith voters, and their Faith, Hope, and Love Supporting Democracy for All bus tour also holds trainings on the threat of Christian nationalism. Doug is actually here from Vote Common Good.
Hello.
Thank you for your support. Please join them for 3 events tomorrow, one focused on engaging Catholic voters at 10 a.m., one around engaging evangelical and young black voters at 1 p.m., and an interfaith leaders meetup at 4 p.m. That's all at the Marriott Marquis, Grand Horizon C. You can find the details on their website at votecommongood.com. And now I will turn it over to Catherine Stewart. I couldn't think of anyone better to lead our discussion today, which is about the existential threat that white Christian nationalism poses to our democracy and how we can build a broad interfaith coalition to combat it together. Catherine Stewart has covered the intersection of faith and politics for over 15 years. Her book, The Power Worshippers: Inside the Dangerous Rise of Religious Nationalism, was voted first place for excellence in nonfiction books by Religion News Association, among other awards. It was optioned by Rob Reiner and forms the basis of the documentary feature film God and Country. Her forthcoming book is titled Money, Lies, and God: Inside the Movement to Destroy American Democracy. I do want to quickly note that we originally had Bishop Barber scheduled to speak today, and unfortunately, due to some miscommunications, we were not able to accommodate his ADA needs, and he did very much want to be with us today, but you can see him speak at the Bad Faith documentary panel on Thursday, and he is a participant in that film. So please give it up for Catherine Stewart and our esteemed panelists, Congressman Emanuel Cleaver, Dr. Kyati Joshi, Congressman Jared Huffman, and eventually, when he gets here, Congressman Jamie Raskin.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was such a lovely introduction. I want to thank all of you for joining us today for this conversation. I'd like to introduce first the panelists. So Congressman Emanuel Cleaver II is now serving his 10th term representing Missouri's 5th Congressional District, the home district of President Harry Truman. He's member of the House Committee on Financial Services, ranking member of the Subcommittee on Housing and Insurance, member of Subcommittee on Capital Markets, and a member of the U.S. Helsinki Commission. He served for 12 years on the City Council of Missouri's largest municipality, Kansas City. He was also elected as the city's first African-American mayor in 1991. Congressman Cleaver is an ordained minister in the United Methodist Church and holds a master's from St. Paul's School of Theology in Kansas City, Missouri. Another panelist who's not here yet, is, oh, just arrived, fantastic. Oh, hello. Well, Congressman Jamie Raskin represents Maryland's 8th District in the House of Representatives. The ranking Democrat on the House Oversight Committee, Raskin was the lead House manager in the impeachment trial of former President Donald Trump for inciting insurrection. He was also on the Select House Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on our Capitol. Prior to Congress, Congressman Raskin was a 3-term state senator in Maryland and a professor of constitutional law at American University. He's authored several books, including the New York Times #1 bestseller, it's an extraordinary book, Unthinkable, Trauma, Truth, and the Trials of American Democracy. And he leads Democracy Summer. My guest right next to me is Dr. Khyati Joshi. She is a public intellectual whose social science research and community connections inform policymakers, educators, and everyday people on issues of race, religion, and immigration in the 21st century. Her most recent book, another extraordinary book, is White Christian Privilege, The Illusion of Religious Equality in America. Amen. And I think she has a copy, so you can hold it up. She is a professor of education at Fairleigh Dickinson University, a frequent media commentator, and a managing board director for Asian Pacific American Religion Research Initiative, which supports academic scholarship and public engagement on the religious realities of Asian and Pacific Islander Americans. And finally, last but not least, we have Congressman Jared Huffman, who represents California's 2nd Congressional District, which spans from the Golden Gate Bridge north to the Oregon border. Congressman Huffman serves currently on the Natural Resources Committee and the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. Recognizing his environmental leadership, Speaker Nancy Pelosi appointed Congressman Huffman to serve on the Select Committee on Climate Change in February 2019. In 2018, he co-founded the Congressional Free Thought Caucus along with Congressman Raskin. And this year, he founded the Stop Project 2025 task force in Congress, which serves as a central hub for pro-democracy activity. Members of Congress and their communities as well, other communities. So with that, I'd really love to open the conversation with a shared understanding of what Christian nationalism is and what it isn't. So Christian nationalism is not a religion, it's not Christianity, and it's not just about a few culture war positions on the margins. It is a deeply anti-democratic ideology that exploits religion for politics and power. I think of it as a mindset and also a machine. The mindset of Christian nationalism says America was founded to be a Christian nation, according to a very deeply reactionary version of Christianity, of course, and that our laws should be based on the Bible. But that ideology is really a tool for a leadership-driven political machine that turns that mythology, that story, that false story into politics and power. So, Congressman Cleaver, I'd like to open the conversation with a question for you. Leaders of the Christian nationalist movement, pardon? Mayor? Oh, fantastic. I'm sorry. We were hoping to have a special guest today, and it turns out we have a special guest. The mayor is here, and we're thrilled to welcome him. Thank you so much.
Wow. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor. Thank you all for your kind reception. I actually was a little bit unclear. I came to sit down and get a little bit comfortable, and then you all just clapped, and then things kind of got silent and awkward for a second. And they said, Mr. Mayor, they want you to talk now. But that reminds me, when I taught 7th grade social studies, that's how my students would greet me all the time. They would just clap to me and just say, thank you, Mr. Johnson. Pour more knowledge into us. But it is truly humbling to host yet another historic moment in our country's, and quite frankly, our world's history. You know, the city of Chicago, which has always found itself at the center of exchanges of ideas, hopes, and aspirations. It's shifted our economy. It's transformed our politics. You know, oftentimes think about how God speaks through our actions. I'll say that one more time. God speaks through our actions. Right. Because in my faith, faith without works is dead. And I think about the love story of Chicago, a black Haitian immigrant and a Potawatomi woman who fell in love and set up a trading post at the banks of the river because they understood that that love story would transfer and translate across the globe. And it's that love story that, quite frankly, covers, as the Bible said, love covers the multitude of sin. I know I'm the mayor of the city of Chicago, but I did go to Sunday school, by the way, and I hope that my father, who was a pastor, he would be impressed. Even though I just said, Dad, I'd never want to be a pastor because it was a non-union job and I didn't like the hours. But it's our faith community that speaks directly as well as provide action. And the people who are providing that action, thank you to the DNC Interfaith Council co-chairs, to Johnny Jones Roebuck and Nadia Ahmad and Cindy Bass and Sarah Livin, thank you. And Congressman Jared Huffman and Congressman Jamie Raskin, and of course, Reverend Dr. William Barber, who just does amazing work around this country. I'll say this just in closing. It's important that as we work to govern, that we don't shy away from our values, and our values are expressed through our faith. And I think about the love story between, you know, Jean-Baptiste Point de Sabo and Kitty Waha, and how they understood that that love would translate in a way that would bring in Carnegie's steel, right? That revolutionized how we built skyscrapers around the world. The Model T, Henry Ford, right here in Chicago. The World Fair, where electricity came to life as we know it, and how our faith can electrify and unite our country. But unfortunately, we have, you know, a political party that uses religion to espouse hate. And it is through that ungodly act that causes endless wars. I mean this with all sincerity. The Biden administration reestablishing the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, I hope you all know how important it is that our faith community comes together and provide the creed that ultimately governs our politics. We get to lead with our faith and our values, and we get to unite people around a shared vision of what love ultimately does. It conquers everything. What does that look like in the city of Chicago? $1.25 billion investment for the west and south sides of the city of Chicago for economic development, neighborhood development, and housing. It's the largest investment for economic development in the history of Chicago. And the reason why I did that, my father often talked about how, as children, he would always say, we know the price, but we don't know the value. And then he would say, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And that's how we are leading in Chicago. We are making sure that our investment speaks to our heart, and our hearts have to always remain with the people. That's why I'm so impressed with Vice President Kamala Harris, a black woman of Asian descent who understands that $100 billion more to create a pathway to home ownership, to create this American dream. That's what this is about. And so thank you all from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for the leadership in this panel. And thank you all for making sure that your faith is how you are ultimately governed. governing. So God bless you all, and God bless the greatest sanctified city in the world, the city of Chicago. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor Johnson. Wow, well, that was just fantastic. And I think that sets the stage, actually, for the first question that I'd like to direct to Congressman Cleaver. Leaders of the Christian nationalist movement argue that liberalism is empty, nihilistic, and leads people to have miserable and unfulfilled lives. That's sort of the, without meaning or purpose. This is the sort of idea behind the childless cat lady meme. But, you know, we know this to be wrong. Liberal democratic society can be very rich and filled with meaning and can help people find purpose. But we need specifics. What is your positive vision for a liberal, just, and values-rich society, and how do we explain that vision in a way that imbues it with meaning and purpose?
Well, first of all, it's important for people in the country to realize, and certainly people in Congress, that God shall not be pimped. And if you can embrace that from the very beginning, you will understand that declaring one's unbending faith and love of God by placing up the Ten Commandments on a wall is nothing but placing 10 Commandments on a wall. The Christian Bible, 66 books, I actually read them. There's something important in there that I think is important. Nothing about God is in the Constitution. Zero. And when people start talking about Christian nationalism, it's a contradiction right there, Christian and nationalism. It's a contradiction. And so I think that this is a critical juncture for us as a nation, because we're seeing this pushed more and more. One final thing, please remember that the founding fathers were not Christian. Washington was a deist. George Washington was not a Christian. He was a deist. Thomas Paine, who was central to our whole founding as a nation, didn't even believe in God, period. So we have to be careful when we launch this whole deal about Christian nationalism as though we're talking about something that's equal to something else. We're not. We're talking about something that's silly, and then things that make sense. And Christian nationalism is ignorant.
Thank you so much, Congressman Cleaver, and thank you for mentioning Thomas Paine, because that leads to a question that I'd like to ask Congressman Raskin. In contrast with Christian nationalism, the origins of progressivism are optimistic. Thomas Paine, an avowed secularist who nonetheless expressed great faith in the revolutionary principles of democracy, said, "We have it in our power to make the world over again." FDR promised a New Deal. But for the past decades, and especially the past 8 years, progressives have often despaired at America's challenges. What can liberals and progressives do to reclaim a vision of a sunny future, even as we are clear-eyed about the challenges, the difficult challenges we face?
I'm sorry, a vision of a...
Pardon?
You said reclaim a vision of
a vision of a sunny future.
Of a sunny future?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. Let me start by thanking you and Congressman Huffman for organizing this, and for everybody for coming out for an important conversation. And I want to begin by echoing what Congressman Cleaver just said about Christian white nationalism, or even just Christian nationalism, not being rooted in our Constitution, and in fact being the antithesis of our Constitution. The idea of marrying an official national ideology with a particular religion undercuts the leading principle of our Constitution embodied in the First Amendment. The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So our Constitution was created, as Congressman Cleaver was saying, by a range of some religionists, some deists, people who thought that God got the whole thing started and then just got out of the way and wasn't going to be involved anymore. And then outright secularists, people more like Tom Paine and Thomas Jefferson, who sometimes dressed themselves in the clothing of deism to give themselves some kind of religious aura, but in fact were rebelling against centuries of religious warfare between the Christians and the Protestants that were every bit as vicious and brutal as the wars today between the Sunni and the Shia, or the war, what do they call it? They want a war of civilizations between Christianity and Islam. I can't remember what George W. Bush said, but there are people who want to do that today, and that's what they were rebelling against. Inquisitions, crusades, witchcraft trials, the politicization of religion, and also the religious takeover of politics and government. And that was the wellspring for the creation of our Declaration and our Constitution, which, as Congressman Cleaver says, does not mention God. It forbids the establishment of any church or religion. That's been extended through the 14th Amendment from the federal government to the states and the localities. And also in Article 6 says that there shall be no religious tests for public office. And so this gave rise to Jefferson's metaphor of the wall of separation between church and state in his famous letter to the Danbury Baptists. So that began, I think, both a secular democratic process of successive social and political movements struggling to create a more perfect union. That meant centrally the battle against slavery in the first century of the Republic, and then continuing battles for civil rights, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, and also the rights of religious minorities as well. But it also created in America a very active, dynamic, and robust religious marketplace because anybody could basically set up shop. There have been attempts to, especially at the beginning, to establish churches and to establish dominant religions. That goes on today, but in the scale of human history and what's going on around the world, we have a lot more religious freedom here than people do in other countries. But the flip side of that is you get particular denominational groups that then want to violate the basic creed of the Constitution, which is to establish their religion. Going back to how Reverend Cleaver started in talking about that 10 Commandments law, which I know a little bit about because some of our colleagues came into the House that day and said, hey, in Louisiana, they just endorsed the 10 Commandments and they're putting the 10 Commandments up in school. That's something that we should do nationally. And it's come up repeatedly through the years, but they were pushing it again. I said, hey, the 10 Commandments have been doing fine for millennia without an endorsement by the Freedom Caucus in the U.S. House of Representatives. We don't need to get into that. No, they said, and I think this was the rhetoric of the Louisiana people too, the 10 Commandments are the foundation and the basis of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. I said, really? Let's start with the First Commandment and the First Amendment. Let's just start with those two. First Commandment says, thou shalt have no other God before me. The First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Those are in direct conflict with each other. One doesn't establish the other. No, they wanted to push forward. I went to my friend in the Rules Committee, Chairman McGovern. I said, look, if we're going to vote on the 10 Commandments on the floor of the United States House of Representatives, we should have to vote on each commandment separately, okay? And I don't want that omnibus package coming out of the Republican conference. And you can't vote for any commandment you've ever violated. How about that? Because you'll be, at that point, taking the name of the Lord in vain. violating the third commandment. And so they charged me with making a mockery out of the whole thing. I said, you guys are making a mockery out of the whole thing. Your bill is not only blatantly unconstitutional, but it's blasphemous at the same time. And so it offends the central principle that we embodied in the Constitution. So where does that leave me? In answer to your question, I would just say this, that the question you pose is really the question of our convention, which is, how do we keep democracy and freedom moving forward in this century? That's really what we're talking about. And democracy, even though we say we're going to save democracy and preserve democracy, it's not a static thing. It's not just a collection of institutions. Democracy is always an unfinished project. It's something in motion. So we got to keep democracy moving. It's 2024. How about it's time we start electing the president the way we elect governors and representatives and senators and mayors? Whoever gets the most votes wins. We don't need to be stuck in the electoral college system. It's time for statehood for people in Washington, D.C. It's time for statehood for people in Puerto Rico. We've got a lot of defects in our constitutional structure. We need to reform them and move forward in doing them. So that's how I think we're going to move forward on that side. But in terms of Christian white nationalism, we need to reassert the absolute excitement and the energy and the life-affirming possibilities of democratic politics. It's the sense of joy that people have right now at our convention and in America, that this is up to us. We've got the power, as Payne said, to make the world over again. We've got that power. And religion plays a very interesting role there. Religion is not out of that. No, on the contrary, I would argue religion is in that, because a lot of our great movements have been the product of coalitions between secular free thinkers and the most forward-thinking progressive religionists we have from every different church and denomination. And I would recommend a very good book to you called Freethinkers, about just this theme by a woman named Sarah Jacoby, who talks about that. So church and state have got to be separate. They've got to be under our First Amendment and our constitutional ethos. But religion and politics, they can mix together just like ethics in politics, morality in politics, music in politics, religion in politics, theater in politics. We can mix these things together. Whatever moves you and animates and inspires you is something that you can bring into the public space and use your language to communicate with other people. And of course, a great example of that from the religious ethos has been Dr. King. And I'll just close with this thought on King. You know, sometimes our Republican colleagues will say to me, well, you talk about separation of church and state, but you didn't mind Dr. King out there doing all of his politics, and you don't, you know, they'll raise, you know, you don't mind Congressman Cleaver and Al Sharpton and all that. I'm like, look, you're confusing different categories here, okay? Dr. King was involved in a movement that had its eyes on establishing equal civil rights for everybody in America, equal voting rights in America. Dr. King was not out there trying to put the Ten Commandments up in people's classrooms according to one particular religious denomination and requiring children to pray according to what a particular government bureaucrat wanted to dictate in a particular community. He wasn't fighting for theocracy in a religious language. He was fighting for equal civil rights and constitutional progress in a language that is grounded in religion, which may be the most powerful political language we've got, but it's a language that progressives have always used to create public secular change and not imposition of a theocratic state. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Joshi, as you point out, Americans like to believe we have religious freedom, but you say we're kidding ourselves. Of course, there's some degree of formal religious freedom in America, but on the ground, some groups have privilege and other groups really have to sit in the back of the room. Can you talk about what you call the optical illusion of religious liberty in our laws and our society?
Take that. Great. Good afternoon, Democrats. Great to be here. Thank you to Sarah Levin and the committee for inviting, and I got a tough act to follow after Representative Raskin. Really appreciate your words also, and really all the work you've been doing. I'm going to back up a second before answering your question. So we've been told from first grade, if you went to school in the United States, that this country was founded on religious freedom. And in first grade, we were fed half a lie. And that is, we were founded on religious freedom for a certain group of people, not for all of us. I'm pretty sure if I had been here then, as a Hindu, they were not giving, working for religious freedom for me. So that's first and foremost. So we really have to start thinking about some of the things we were taught going through K through 12 education in this country, and a lot of things we haven't been taught. So when it comes to religious freedom, I do think about it as an optical illusion. What does an optical illusion do? It distorts what's in front of you, and you also sometimes can't see what's right in front of you. And so the sense is that because we have First Amendment, freedom of religion, as was articulated, oh, well, it's written down, therefore it's a reality. And that's just not true. There are many folks who face discrimination every day just to pray safely, just to live their faith. So yes, on paper we have freedom of religion, but that doesn't translate into reality. But because we don't really talk about religion, especially in schools, there's a sense that the presence of religious diversity, which we've seen an increasing presence after the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, well, if we've got all these different faiths here, they must be okay. And that's not reality, right? And then separation of church and state was also brought up. Every year in my classes, I conduct an informal poll. Where is the separation of church and state found? And most of the time, folks want to say the Declaration or the Constitution, right? It is not in any of our founding documents, as was mentioned. It's a phrase that Thomas Jefferson wrote in a letter to a Danbury Baptist congregation, and it was then kind of forgotten about until 1947 Supreme Court case dealing with religion and schools and busing, actually, right? And then it was it caught wind and became part of the popular ethos. So the notion that there should be a separation of church and state is something we keep going back to, but in all of that, we can actually see how Christianity is embedded in our legal and social infrastructure. And I want to make this very clear point, right? There's Christianity, and then there's Christian nationalism. But what we see throughout United States history is that Christianity is present, Protestant Christianity to be exact, in our immigration laws. That Protestant Christianity has impacted how Supreme Court justices have made their decisions. These are in the cracks and crevices of US history, and because we are not taught to see those, we don't understand the impact of this on today. This is Christian privilege, and I know that folks have kind of this negative sometimes, not folks here usually, who are Democrats, but elsewhere have this kind of negative, visceral reaction to the word privilege. Another way to think about privilege is advantage, right? So Christianity has been advantaged from the get-go all throughout, and we've got to start realizing that. We've got to start making that which has been invisible, visible.
Thank you so much. Congressman Huffman, America's right wing, along with Christian nationalist leaders, have turned environmentalism into a kind of a heresy. It can be difficult sometimes to talk about the environmental challenges that we face, even weather challenges, without wading into a culture war in which environmentalism or weather science or climate science is referred to on the right as a false religion. I've even seen it referred to as a green dragon. It's referred to as a form of Satanism. How should the environmentally minded respond to this? And how can our values, whether anchored in a particular faith tradition or in humanistic values, how can they play a role?
Thank you, Catherine, for the question. And let me just say a couple things by way of getting at the answer to your question. First of all, I love the fact that I'm part of a political party where different faith perspectives are embraced and seen as something that makes us stronger and better, and not something that threatens us, that threatens perhaps the loss of our privilege, as Dr. Yoshi might put it. There's just a fundamental difference between Democrats and Republicans in this regard. Republicans are all about hanging on to that white Christian privilege. Democrats, at our best, are about a big tent that embraces critical thinking and lots of different perspectives. And I loved Hillary Clinton's line last night that Americans and Democrats believe in the right to worship as you choose or not. Okay, so I am the not part of that equation. I definitely am comfortable, and I value the relationships and the collaborations I have with people of faith. I love the term interfaith and the fact that this panel carries that term. I love working with my buddy Emmanuel Cleaver, who's a man of really deep faith. And he and I are friends and colleagues and collaborators, even though he knows I don't believe the same things he does. I'm a humanist, which means I get to many of the same universal values that inspire and motivate us, but I get there in a really different way. So the environment is a pretty good example of that, Catherine. And let me just say our moderator didn't get maybe the introduction that she should have. She has written a book that if you want to understand Christian nationalism, you've got to read Catherine Stewart's Power Worshippers book, because there have been so many things written about Christian nationalism, many of them like from the theological perspective, but she has such a thoroughly researched and insightful analysis of what it really is, which is about power. And nobody's been quite as bold, I think, in really dissecting it and getting at the essence of why Christian nationalism should be seen as such a fundamental threat to Americans. So thank you for that. Now, on the environment. Why do they hate environmentalists so much? Well, they don't all. I mean, Reverend Cleaver's a great example of the kind of forward-thinking religionist who draws inspiration from the creation of the world in his view and sees that as part of an obligation as a Christian, as a person of faith, to take care of God's creation. As an environmentalist, I love working with religious environmentalists who come at it from that perspective. Now, I get to a sacred place from a very different perspective. I believe this is all we got. I don't think we can make up for it in an afterlife, because I don't think there is one. And when you kind of get at it through that critical path, listening to the scientists who tell us that this may be the only place that intelligent life exists. Intelligent life, and Republicans too, exist right here on this planet. So that pretty quickly gets you to a point where we had better take care of this. This is amazing. How fortunate I am to be part of this. And it, in a very different way, gets you to that universal value of taking care of our planet and our environment. So the reason Christian nationalists hate it is partly because they see environmentalism as something that maybe threatens the religious view of creation, but I think there's something even more cynical at work, because as Catherine explains in her book, Christian nationalism is this weird marriage between like billionaire plutocrats that aren't even religious in any authentic way, but they have just adopted Christian nationalism as a really useful way to advance their agenda of lack of regulation and lower taxes and other things to hang on to their wealth privilege, if you will. So I think that's what's going on probably more than anything else. Most of the wealth accumulated over the last century has come directly or indirectly from the fossil fuel industry. And so when we talk about seriously confronting the climate crisis, it's a pretty direct threat to those power centers.
Thank you so much. And You're absolutely right about that. A lot of the big funders, the Christian nationalist movement, have grown their wealth through these extractive industries, fossil fuel, fracking, things like that. So this really leads into my next question for Congressman Cleaver, which is, this is a movement that claims to stand for family values, but they're driving support for politicians whose policies are making it so much harder for so many American families to succeed. They advocate, more or less, not just effectively stealing from the poor and giving to the rich, but stealing from the poor and giving to the rich while insisting that that's what their religion requires. And they say that they're morally righteous in doing so. So can you tell us about how they use the culture wars to distract us from the challenges that are faced by ordinary Americans?
Well, Satan performed a wedding between interpretation of religion and interpretation of politics. And so they performed the ceremony, they got married, and created more evil, or little bitty evils that grew up to become big evils. These little ones, you gotta take control when they're little. You let them get grown, they'll destroy your house. And I think we have to understand that in order for the religion they preach to have impact, they have got to somehow make sure that it is interwoven in their politics, because that's the only way we can have a national religion. They have to be put in a wedding ceremony and marriage and walk and hold hands and so forth. And so whatever they say, they come up with something religious. It's rarely the book that they use. I mean, the Bible that they hold up backwards. But I think I think we need to understand that you can get people to believe just about anything in religion. The power of religion is illimitable. It can, if it touches something, it can have power. It can cause them to kill, to steal, to do just about anything. So, when you say something politically, you want people to think that it is also godly. That's right. And I think it's very dangerous for. I mean, the environment is a perfect example. The 24th Psalm says, I'm sure they've read it many times, the earth is the Lord's and everything that is in it. I mean, so we are visitors at best. Yes. And so they do this, and we love the Lord. The Ten Commandments, look, I know that I love the Lord. Anybody here from Washington? Yeah. If you live over near the Capitol, you may have seen this yard where they have the big sign with the Ten Commandments in the yard. You don't see anybody breaking the commandments out there in the yard. But you don't see anything else happening in the yard. I mean, they don't use the yard, for example, to give out food to kids going to school in the morning. At least I haven't observed it. I live right around the corner from that sign. And as I told some folks this morning, my theological education, God dealt with the Ten Commandments. He did not say display. He said obey. So I think, the Speaker of the House is probably a good, decent person. He said, if you want to know my political philosophy, read the Bible. Ladies and gentlemen, that was one of the most dangerous things that has fallen from the lips of a politician in my years of involvement. I mean, we can't even, listen to this, the Christians in here. We can't even agree on how to do the Lord's Prayer. Forgive us our debts. That's right. That's right. If we can't even agree on the Lord's Prayer, how in the world are we going to rule a nation based on what we believe? So, 248 years of the United States, and we have made it thus far without a national religion. I'm a United Methodist. For those of you who we are, the founders and the people that followed them were really afraid of us because Methodism started on Aldersgate Street in London. And so when John Wesley and his brother Charles came to the United States and started doing this religion, and people started poking fun of them, calling them, because they said there's a method to salvation, so started calling them Methodists. And so what happened was people said, we got to stay away from them. Why? They came from England where they had royalty, kings, and a national religion. They came here to avoid that, and then now their children and grandchildren are trying to create it, what they say they left England to avoid.
Thank you so much. Congressman Raskin, there's a quote in your book drawn from your friend Claudio Grossman. The quote is, "When it comes to your house, fascism invades every nook and cranny, every fine detail of your existence. For that reason, it will be visible early on if you just open your eyes to it." You know, the F word, fascism, is kind of charged, and people are sometimes really afraid to use it. But the word authoritarianism sometimes seems a bit nicer. But fascism is really a danger of our time. And can you unpack that a little for us? Can you tell us a little bit more about what we're up against in this election? And what do we need to open our eyes to?
Yeah, just preliminarily on the use of the word fascism, you got to check out Madeleine Albright's last book before she died, which is called Fascism, A Warning. And she starts by saying, I want to tell you why I'm using the F word. She says it's a mistake to think that fascism has a stable and defined ideological content. It's actually mutating. There are certain elements that appear and reappear over time, racism and anti-Semitism and misogyny and authoritarianism and so on. But she said the correct way to think about it, she argues, is fascism is a strategy for taking power, for particular groups to oppress other groups in society. So we know, for the reasons, again, Congressman Cleaver pointed out, that religion is often used as a weapon and a tool for achieving and obtaining political power, just like violence is used. And so there are, the political scientists give us some pretty disturbing indicia of an authoritarian or a fascist political party, for example. One is they don't accept the outcome of democratic elections that don't go their way. Two, they embrace or they refuse to disavow political violence as an instrument for obtaining and maintaining political power. Three, they organize themselves as a cult of personality around a charismatic or allegedly charismatic figure. And four, they use scapegoating, racism, anti-Semitism, immigrant bashing as a way to organize people. So, all of those things are very much in play. But religion becomes more and more important in the hands of right-wing authoritarians precisely because they don't have a social public policy program to appeal to the vast majority of people. They are representing a very small group of people. I mean, think of like the Silicon Valley billionaires who are behind J.D. Vance today, or think about Donald Trump and his family. I mean, we're talking about minuscule numbers of people in the country who are part of what, Jared Huffman describes as sort of the economic and social basis for right-wing MAGA politics in America. So they use religion as a way to try to extend the social base. So there's some voters in there so they can increase themselves. And that religion, they're willing to cross denominational lines, but the bottom line is it's got to be top-down, authoritarian religion that appeals to the most negative and hostile of emotions. It's got to be about exclusion and hatred and we don't like what you're doing and so on, and we're going to march all over you. And that's where religion comes in, but in a totally predatory and convenient way. It's not because somebody said they have some kind of religious insight or impulse. It's a way of organizing people into a power system.
Thank you so much. And that actually leads us into another question for Dr. Joshi. Can you tell us about how the fear among some white Americans of racial diversity is driving the rise of a certain form of religious extremism? How these bigotries and projections play into that?
So first, I'll move that. Great. We'll do that. Something didn't sound right for a second. So first, I think we have to think about white Christian nationalists and why the fear is there. Very simply put, they feel that something is being taken away. They feel that something is being taken away. Well, what is that? What's being taken away? One of the things that's really critical and important to white Christian nationalists is racial purity. Racial purity and the purity of white women, that's a separate lecture for a separate time or a separate discussion for a separate time. But we see this, the purity factor and question all throughout United States history. And, what we need to do is just go back to the 60s for a second and think about what transpired. We had 64, the fight for civil rights, and we got civil rights legislation. We're still working on it, right? We're still working on it. It's there on paper, still working on making it reality. 65, we get the Immigration and Nationality Act. Our doors to immigration had effectively been closed for almost 40 years, and we opened them to all the countries of the world. And then in 67, with Loving versus Virginia, we said, hey, all y'all can marry. And we really made that a reality in 2015 with Oberfeld v. Hodges, because in 67 it was just all y'all can marry for straight people, right? So then, what do we see about a generation later? We start seeing a rise in the biracial, multiracial population, right? The fruits of all of that, We have immigrants who've settled, and we have second and third generation Americans who are here. So the presence of racial diversity, the increasing presence of religious diversity leads to white Christian nationalists feeling their country is being taken away. That these people coming, because it's a us and them argument, these people coming are not us. They are not part of us. And that's not okay, right? I'm going to share a little story here. I grew up a little brown Hindu girl in Atlanta, Georgia. Not necessarily the easiest thing in the world in the 1980s. People didn't know what to do with me because I wasn't black and I wasn't white. And then on top of that, I said I was Hindu, so it was like, what's that? National Geographic wasn't helping, by the way they depicted India and always portraying it as backwards. So anyway, my father is the reason I'm in this country, is he's the part of the wave of doctors who came from Asia after the Immigration Act of '65. So Dad practiced medicine in Cobb County, Georgia, and his office manager was a white Southern Baptist woman. And she told me many, many, many years later that when she started working for my dad, she was given a hard time by her church. And her church members said, how can you work for that man? And Vicki, God rest her soul, because she passed away, she worked for my dad for 28 years. And she stuck by my dad, and I will say my dad stuck by her. So Vicky went back to the church and said, no, this is a good man. My dad is dark-skinned like me and Hindu. They didn't understand what Hindu was. To them, he was just a heathen because he was not Christian. Another topic to talk about. And Vicky stuck with Dad. Well, a few years later, their minister left. A new reverend came. And wouldn't you believe it, his wife ended up working for my dad.
Wow.
Because Vicky stuck with Dad. She's like, no, you don't know him. He's not like X, Y, or Z. She had her prejudices. We all do, let's be clear. But it was that contact. It was that contact that helped her reduce her prejudice. And this is a sociological theory that's been around for 60, 70 years, that if we get to know one another, then something replaces the stereotypes you know about people. And that's really, really important. We have white Christian nationalists today who don't want to know who might be their neighbor, who might be sitting, next to them in the movie theater. They don't want to know because for them, racial purity is everything. For them, a President Harris is anathema. For us, President Harris would be beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
Thank you so much. Congressman Huffman, no matter the outcome of the 2024 election, the existing Supreme Court is going to remain a stronghold for Christian nationalism. We have a hard right Supreme Court, and they're going to undermine religious freedom in the name of protecting the rights of Christian conservatives to discriminate and to claim government funding for the purpose. What are our options for addressing the judiciary? And I'm wondering, do you support any reforms or any ethics enforcement mechanisms?
So, Catherine, I completely agree with the problem statement, and I think we all know that that appeal to heaven flag didn't just show up on Alito's flagpole. I mean, that is a message. All of it is very deliberate and purposeful and insidious, and this Supreme Court is totally in the tank for basically interpreting the Establishment Clause out of the First Amendment and elevating the Free Exercise Clause and freedom of speech to become these weapons for discrimination and for all sorts of other things that would be prohibited for the rest of us, but they're going to wrap it in religion and speech and allow us to kind of go backward on civil rights from Obergefell to just everything else. It's a very deliberate and insidious plan, and the Supreme Court is in on it in a big way. It's also about their economic interests. And in that sense, I think that it's a lot like the marriage that the mega industrialists of 100 plus years ago made with the Supreme Court at that time, and using weapons like substantive due process doctrine to basically continue to increase their own wealth. So it's bad, and we are going to need to reform the Supreme Court. And I think the real challenge here is that the Supreme Court is not a democratic institution. It's not something that we can just sort of vote in a different direction. These are lifetime appointments. This is a court that's meant to operate as a third branch of government with its own constitutional authority. And so it is absolutely tricky. But it's also no accident that this anti-democratic institution has been used and weaponized by the Christian nationalist movement. Democracy doesn't work for Christian nationalists, right? They've sort of figured that out. And so what they do is they leverage the anti-democratic authorities within our republic, the Electoral College, the Supreme Court, the fact that every state in the Union gets 2 United States senators, no matter how small they may be. These are the levers of power that are advancing their agenda. And they hope to use those leverage and some combination of those levers to actually end democracy. And that's what Project 2025 is all about. Yes. So how are we going to fix it? Well, it starts with winning elections, okay? So the definitive way to prevent the worst of these outcomes and to stop Project 2025 is to make sure we have a resounding victory in this election. Now then we're going to have to do some other things. We're going to have to do some legislating, and I think we're going to have to look at the Supreme Court. But I don't want to peddle false hope about Supreme Court reform either. Look, if we can, I think the cleanest, easiest way to fix the problem is to impeach Clarence Thomas. And so, you know, the sort of chain of events I could imagine is that we win, we do the trifecta, and we can actually open an impeachment inquiry, use the authorities that would give us.
It's happened.
Quit relying on ProPublica to tell us about all the corruption in the Supreme Court, and actually dig into this and get people under oath, including maybe Clarence and Ginny Thomas. Wouldn't that be interesting television? And then go ahead and impeach him, because he's the most corrupt thing we've ever seen on the United States Supreme Court. It'll probably reveal some bad stuff about Sam Alito too, so who knows where that goes. But I think that's the most direct play. And then get someone who can do blind justice on the Supreme Court, which would go a long way toward fixing this problem. I know there's other ideas, and I should probably lean on Jamie Raskin to my left, because he knows this stuff very, very well. But you know, whether it's expanding the court or some kind of attempt to legislate a mandatory binding ethics standard, you know, those are all possibilities I'd be interested in as well.
Thank you. I would love you to weigh in, please.
Sure. Well, you know, President Biden laid out some basic reforms. I would go further in some ways, but he's starting by saying, look, the highest court in the land should not have the lowest ethical standards in the land, okay? So we need an ethics regime for the U.S. Supreme Court. AOC and I have introduced legislation to take the $50 gift ban that applies to those of us in Congress and people in the executive branch and apply it to the Supreme Court. I mean, we'd be in jail if we were taking $4 million like Clarence Thomas for, you know, deluxe luxury foreign travel. He got a recreational vehicle motor coach with a dining room in it and a kitchen and a bedroom, which started out, it was supposed to be like a layaway plan, like a loan, and then they just gave it to him. He got private school tuition for a member of his family. His mother's mortgage got paid off by one of these billionaire sugar daddies from the Federalist Society. And so, I mean, we look at that and we don't even understand that. Like we don't have lobbyists take us out for lunch. We buy our own 7-Up or coffee.
They can give you a snow globe, and that's about it.
Yeah, I mean, we don't do anything, you know? And then we look at the justices are flying all over the world and with people who have a direct interest in the litigation. So we need an ethics regime. We need an inspector general. We need a gift ban. That's just to start off with. But then that just deals with the ethics crisis on the court. What about the jurisprudential crisis on the court, the legitimacy crisis on the court? So President Biden says, let's move to 18-year terms. And, you know, it's perfectly fine constitutionally because the justices, they are guaranteed life tenure during good behavior, but they still could keep their federal judgeship. They wouldn't be on the Supreme Court anymore. So they'd go to a district judgeship or they'd go to a circuit judgeship. So they'd still, you know, have their life sinecure. You know, when the Constitution was written, the life expectancy in the country was something like 58 or 60. Now we're getting up into the 90s. I mean, we're going to have like Brett Kavanaugh on the court till he's like 127 years old. I mean, these people are going to be on the court for 70 years or 80 years. Like, that makes no sense. So the president is right on this. We should have 18-year terms, and he says 2 presidential nominations for each president, rather than just having it be based on the arbitrary factor of who leaves when, who gets sick, who dies, and so on. But I would just go a little bit further and say this, because we've got not just a long-term problem, we had a short-term problem with these people. We could win concurrent Democratic majorities in the House and the Senate, win the White House. We could, and we're going to, thank you, and then we could press the legislative agenda we're talking about, which is let's codify Roe versus Wade. Let's pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Let's create universal pre-K. We could do all of that. We could do all of it, and here's the punchline: the Roberts Court could strike it all down. Yep. And I mean, take codifying Roe versus Wade for an example. They will say undoubtedly, I've got no doubt about Thomas and Alito and Gorsuch, probably Kavanaugh. I mean, our only hope, would be Roberts sticking with the liberals, and maybe Amy Coney Barrett, maybe. But I've got no doubt about the rate. They will say Congress does not have the authority to legislate a right federally without a federal power. Where's your power? If we say, well, what about Section 5 of the 14th Amendment? We can implement equal protection due process. They will say, as they said in numerous cases, including the Violence Against Women Act case, they will say, you don't defend or enforce a right by extending what the right is. And you're extending a constitutional right that doesn't exist anymore because we eliminated it. And then we say, all right, the Commerce Clause. You guys use the Commerce Clause for everything. We'll use the Commerce Clause to say this affects interstate commerce. They will say, no, this is not essentially commercial or economic activity. You really have some political or ideological agenda. It's not about regulating commerce, and let's strike it down. All of which is to say, I don't think it's enough to say, well, people will retire at 18 years and over time, the next several decades, will restore some kind of balance. We need some balance now. That's why I say, look, we've got 13 federal circuits in the United States. 13 of them, we have 9 justices, which means, by definition, 4 circuits are left out. Actually, today, I think 9 circuits are left out. We got 5 justices from New York City, all right? 1 for each borough, like Manhattan, Bronx, Staten Island. Like, we got a justice that could correspond to each one. I love visiting New York as much as the next person, but come on. I mean, let's get real. I think we can go to the country and say there should be at least 1 justice who's appointed from each region of the country. So everybody's represented. Let's go to 13 justices. We'll add 4, and we'll begin to restore some balance. Because look, the Republicans have lost 7 of the 9 last presidential elections in the popular vote, right? I mean, even when they win, they lose. Donald Trump lost to Hillary by 3.5 million votes. Then he lost to Joe Biden by more than 7 million votes. George Bush, when he won in the Electoral College, he lost to Vice President Gore by more than 500,000 votes. They've lost the popular vote 7 of the last 9 times, and Bush and Trump, those 2 minority vote presidents, have appointed 6 of the 9 justices, 2/3 of the court. So you ask me why the Supreme Court is in a completely different place from the American people. I'll tell you why. It's called the Electoral College. That's why we have it. And just to piggyback my final point on what Jared Huffman was saying, every anti-democratic device in the Constitution and out of the Constitution are now cooperating and collaborating together to defeat democracy. I'm talking about the Supreme Court. I'm talking about the Electoral College. I'm talking about gerrymandering of our federal and state districts. We've got states where Democrats will probably be winning a majority, but you've had decade after decade Republicans slicing and dicing and carving up the majorities. A 6th grader can do it at this point with the computer technology, which means the Republicans can do it. They can do it, and they have been doing it. And I've been traveling all over the country and been seeing. So all of these devices work together to thwart the will of the majority. And what we're fighting for is strong democracy. We got to get back on the growth track for democracy in America.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say that Congressman Cleaver unfortunately has to leave us a few minutes early. So thank you so much.
Before I go, because this is something, well, let me two quick things. One, when we're on the floor and we got legislation that kind of has some judicial components, my position, my clear and unambiguous position, is to vote what Jamie Raskin just did. Whatever he did, that's my position. And with my friend Jared Huffman, I've said he is the most Christian non-Christian that I know. And I was on his podcast, and I think it's, I think you want to look at it, a Christian, look at Mahatma Gandhi. I mean, I mean, he's not a Christian, but that's, the whole point is you can call yourself whatever you want. If you're a mess, you're a mess. The other part of, when I was in seminary, this is what I would like for everybody here to remember, please. One of the courses I took was called Christianity and the Holocaust. And it's important to know that the first thing Hitler did, and this is, most people, I mean, and it's important for you to know, you can go read it to check on me, was to get all of the churches to accept a lot of the young Nazis to come to Sunday school. And they started mixing in Christianity and Nazism in the church, in the Christian church. One of my heroes was Jewish, and I've come to love him, not like Trump loves Putin, but
You mean it's not romantic?
it's not romantic. Dietrich Bonhoeffer is my main man, and Dietrich Bonhoeffer, put his whole life on the line in resisting what he saw what Hitler was trying to do in the churches. He was a Lutheran. He saw what Hitler was doing in the church, and then began to resist. And the other thing that you may not, anybody here from New York City? Yeah, okay, well, you can relate to everybody, all of you guys probably can. He came to the United States, Bonhoeffer. He started going to Abyssinian Baptist Church, which the church was pastored by one of our Adam Clayton Powell Sr., and then the Prince of Abyssinian, and he taught Sunday school at Abyssinian Baptist Church in New York City, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. But what drew him there first was the music. That's what he declared. It was the music. Then he went into the church. Yes, that's right. So please understand that what we're experiencing now, Hitler did it years ago. Pray in the schools. If you go start reading about the Holocaust and Christianity, as one of the courses I had to take, you'll see started in the schools. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much. We've got about 2 minutes remaining, literally 2 minutes. And so in these last 2 minutes, I'm going to say 4 words, and if each of you could give a few moments to reflect on those words. The words are hope, faith, commitment, and determination, and you have 30 seconds each. So.
And the most important of these is love.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Read that somewhere.
Thank you.
That's all I got.
Look, I think all of these are important values, but I would just encourage us to remember that faith does not have to mean religious faith. We're a big tent with all kinds of universal values that bring us together. We get to the same place in different ways. I get there through critical thinking and through a kind of science-based humanism, but I think...
And good looks, too.
And,
sure.
well,
yeah, so you get
a
this
little
as
bit.
Yeah.
Let's remember the value of religious pluralism and keeping faith, if you will, with the separation of church and state, because that is the antidote to this threat of Christian nationalism.
Dr. Joshi?
I would say that we really need to honor everyone who wants to live their faith the way they want to live it, or not live their faith the way they want to live it. And we often have, oh, you're a Muslim, you must believe this. You're a Sikh, you must believe this. And there's this concept of lived religion, which says, we're not doing the Wikipedia version of religion, so you go learn, what are the Gospels and when was Jesus born, but how does religion exist in our lives? And that's full of contradictions, it's full of complexity, and I think as Democrats, if we remember that, then we can really honor one another and do the work we need to do to ensure victory in November.
Thank you so much
Catherine,
to these panelists.
could I actually take 20 seconds back? Is that,
Please.
that's all right? Because I think that Reverend Barber was unable to come just because of accessibility reasons, and that's profoundly unfortunate. And I'm really, displeased that he wasn't able to be with us here today. But he is a magnificent leader in the prophetic sense, both as a religious leader and a secular leader. And I just want to be able to say that. And I also want to thank you, Captain, because I think I've just read the manuscript for your new book, which is awesome. I think I'm either reviewing it or doing a blurb for you. I can't remember which.
Either.
But I want to thank you for the great work you're doing on this. And look, we're never going to be as organized and hierarchical and militaristic as Christian white nationalism. That's not the way the party of democracy and freedom works. And yet, I think what we're seeing just exploding around the country is a sense of moral renewal and commitment to the vision of a strong liberal democracy where everybody can flourish and everybody can succeed. So thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, and thanks to all of you for coming. Such a pleasure to see you.
Oh, how great to see you here. Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Oh, thank you. Nice to see you all the way here. So you're a delegate?
Can I get a...
Good.
Yes, go right ahead.
Anyone else from Humboldt?
Can I get a quick photo?
Yes.
And I'd like one with conversation.
All right. Well, it's great to have you here. Thanks for saying hello. Thanks for being at this panel. How are you? Hey, I recognize you. It's a collector's item.
Yes. I was his congressman, so his erstwhile congressman.
Very quick. My sister is a constituent of yours.
Awesome.
Rockville.
Really, send her my love, will you?
I will. Thank you.
We can do a picture?
I don't know. Does everybody just want to do a picture? Is that what we're doing? All right.
Catherine?
Okay, I'll come
We're going to
down.
get a group photo up here.
Oh, yeah, can we do a group photo? Actually, can we do a group photo?
Okay, thank you. Congressman
I
Rossi.
got some place I got to leave here in 4 minutes. Could we do a big group photo?
Yes, we're going to get a panel.
Oh, I would do a speaker.
Right this way.
All right. Thank you much. Here we go.
Yeah, let's get up there.
We're going to do a speaker's photo.
All right, a speaker's photo. Yeah, your book is awesome.
Okay.
Yeah, wait, do you need a book for me soon? I can't remember. Oh my God. Tell me when. Just tell me when.
Okay. Should I call for 3? Okay.
Because I'm flying back on Friday. Can I do it on
Okay.
Friday?
Okay.
Because I've already read
This
it.
way.
1, 2, 3, go. Oh my God.
So hi.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Your name? Autumn.
You got a new? What?
Thank you for coming.
Okay. Sure. Sure.
Where are you from?
I'm from Tacoma, Texas.
Texas.
But I used to live in New York and Chicago.
All right, should we have every